Station 51, engine 27, engine 32, truck 105.
You're listening to The Fire Break with Steve Wolf. Welcome back to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you undoubtedly know from my repeatedly saying it, the teeth have to be replaced. Okay, something like that. The Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing really innovative technologies for putting out wildfires. Check out Team Wildfire on the web at teamwildfire.com. There, sponsored message out of the way. Thank you, sponsors, though, seriously. I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Kira Hoffman, today. And Dr. Hoffman, aka Kira, is a fire ecologist, according to her LinkedIn page. And there's so much not understood about fire, good fire, bad fire, etc., that I really wanted to hear directly from Kira. What is fire ecology? And welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Fire ecology, wow, it can mean a lot of different things depending on where you are. For me, it's about understanding the connection of fire to place. And so, place is really about people, it's about plants, and it's about the environment. So, to me, that's what I'm really looking at when I think about fire ecology. I'm located in northwestern British Columbia, so right near the Panhandle of Alaska. It's about 18-hour drive from Vancouver, BC. So
Wow.
yeah, it seems pretty far north. It's actually just the center of our province. It's a very large province, and very diverse culturally, environmentally, socially. So yeah.
Okay. So social diversity doesn't impact physics, right? I mean, the physics of fire are the same everywhere, but how we feel about it, how we manage it or fail to manage it or mismanage it, or even in some cases properly manage it, is really a function of so many different cultural factors. So how do you take all that into the mix?
Well, the way I think about fire is really literally, so there's a lot that goes into understanding fire. We as humans have shaped fire. It's kind of one, I would like to start by thinking about it as it's our one of our greatest achievements. So we started harnessing fire, controlling fire about 2 million years ago, and that really helped us develop socially. It brought things um, together, so people together, food together, and it really helped develop language and all of these different things. It kind of created this social dynamics of culture. So fire, when I think about it, I think I start there. And then when you look at that last 2 million years, human and fire have evolved together. And a
We've only
lot of
been
the
humans for a couple 100,000 years, right? As Homo sapiens.
Yeah, I mean, but we've evolved with fire,
Yes.
and many of our fire dependent landscapes are because humans really perpetuated the use of fire. So when I think about fire behavior now, I like to think about it in the context of all that history and how we kind of got here, and think about the impacts to people, to culture, fire suppression policies, and how all of that shaped the fire behavior we see now, including a rapidly changing climate.
So there's so much to it. And I'm just curious. I'm looking at all that beautiful snow behind you,
Mhm.
and you I've heard that up in the indigenous Alaskan areas, there's more than 50 words for snow, and yet there still seems to be basically one word for fire.
Interesting. Indigenous cultures here in British Columbia have many words for fire.
Okay,
Um,
we're left out.
many, many ways of describing fire. And I think what's also very interesting is in many of those language, wildfire doesn't really exist. So it
And
makes you think that maybe there was a very different relationship with fire in the past. And that's clear from indigenous knowledge and science, where they say, well, we've always managed fire.
right, whereas in our modern culture, we've really more often always mismanaged fire. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes from the fact that we fear fire now instead of coexisting with it or understanding it in the way that we once did.
I see. Okay. So what are your big takeaways from what you've learned from indigenous management of fire that could be applied to the way we poorly manage fire now?
Well, I really support Indigenous-led fire stewardship, and fire stewardship in general. So there's many different cultures that use fire. And what I've learned is that you can't really understand fire if you're not engaging with fire. So you really need to be in the place that you're studying fire, researching fire, and working with people again to have that better relationship. And so I've learned a lot about plants, and a lot about how to manage plants with fire because really, when it comes down to it, for many nations, fire is just so strongly related to food security because open forests that are managed with fire have more foods. They have more productive berry plants, they have more productive tubers. And so these plants are really, really important for the health of indigenous communities, and they always have been. So I think the food component is one thing that I really think about when working with indigenous communities. And also, um, when communities are regularly using fire, it's never just for one objective, it's for many different objectives. And that's really apparent in having um, reduced wildfire risk to communities, having that food security, but then also having things like cleaner water, because fire and water are really intricately connected as well.
Very interesting. So, I guess one of the things that would come up there would be like, who has authority over fire, right? That an entire community is impacted by either prescribed burn or, indigenous fire activity. Um, but not everyone's in charge of whether it happens or not, or where it happens, or when it happens. How are different cultures approaching who's given the authority to use fire as a tool?
Yeah, it's a pretty complicated question, and very different in different provinces, and whether, like, basically it comes down to land ownership and rights and title. Importantly, in British Columbia, we've adopted UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And within that declaration is the right to burn. And so the right to have sovereignty over land and fire. And so right now, there is a real push to co-lead fire management. There's actually still a lot of barriers to having access to fire. There is, of course, permits that you need to go through. And what I'm seeing is that both sides are trying to work together. So agencies, governments, with other indigenous governments to try and find a path forward. Um, it wasn't very long ago that just fire was just completely banned. It was all suppression. And now, as we try and move more to that proactive fire management, it's about kind of building trust and making sure that going through this process, you're trying to be partners. And I think it's really challenging because there's a lot of colonial history and a lot of impacts. We know that Indigenous communities, work by Dr. Terry McGee and Dr. Amy Cardinal Christensen, have really looked at the disproportionate impacts to Indigenous communities in Canada. They're 43% more likely to experience evacuations from a wildfire. And that's just the beginning of it. There's many impacts with evacuations and home loss, and also the environmental impacts that come with fire. So we're trying to kind of find that path forward, and it can be really challenging. And recognizing that not all nations or different communities want to use fire again. It might not be a practice that is desired. And so I think right now it's just about kind of building that trust and having those conversations about, okay, well, what do you want to do? What is your, biggest thing that you want to use fire for? How do you want to use it? When do you want to use it? Can we work together? I think is the big part of it.
I was a little surprised that you said that the indigenous communities were more likely to be evacuated. because I would have thought that those were the communities that were using fire more regularly, which would lower their fire risk.
Well, there's been bans on using fire. So fire wasn't just suppressed, so there was also colonial impacts that are still felt today. And so the displacement of people from their lands and put into reservations, it really cut the ties between not only nations and other nations, but nations and their practices and their language. And through that, also a disconnection with fire, because when people aren't on the land practicing, then that knowledge suffers loss. And so you can't just undo that.
Right.
It takes a lot of time, and yeah, it can be a really hard thing, I'm sure, to work through. I'm not Indigenous, and my role is to support capacity building, and ultimately, hopefully, in 5 or 10 years, I won't be needed at all in this role because there'll be Indigenous fire ecologists, and they'll be practicing Indigenous science, and using Western science or just different forms of knowledge to manage fires within their territory. Um, so that's kind of the goal, is for, I guess, like these relationships to be really strong, and we can move forward with a proactive use of fire that is led truly by nations, and also, led by other groups too. So farmers and guide outfitters, and other folks who actively want to use fire as well, managing trap lines. There's all sorts of different groups that want to engage in a different way with fire.
And you said that maybe in 5 to 10 years you'd be replaced by an indigenous fire wisdom person, but you also said that as a result of displacement, people are been separated from knowledge that had been passed on from generation to generation, right? Because the culture is disrupted and they're in new places. So it's likely that indigenous wisdom has to be rediscovered based on new location and new circumstances.
Well, in some places, it's never left. It's always been there and it's been continuous and passed on through generation. In other places, if it has, that nation has suffered that knowledge loss, then they can work with other nations to find a practice that might work for their community now. Um, there is just this growing body of knowledge, and many firekeepers with incredible experience and you know expertise in both fire ecology and more of the like prescribed and cultural fire. And so I think that what we're seeing is kind of this groundswell and return to fire practices in a really good way. So yeah, the capacity building is really important, but hopefully we won't be building capacity forever.
Right. It sounds almost as if it's more of a PR challenge than a science challenge.
I think like it can just be the colonial processes, and we're still in a very much like a colonial government that, until we really truly recognize Indigenous rights and title and value that science and knowledge as equal, or in some cases, it may far surpass Western science. Um, Understanding that and appreciating it, I think, is really, really helpful first step.
So what do you see as the path to understanding and trusting indigenous fire practices?
Well, I think that supporting true Indigenous-led is really important. I think we're still very afraid of having fires escape and become wildfires, if they're not done at the right time or under the right circumstances, or kind of in the incident command system. it's really difficult. That incident command system is really designed with kind of one leader on top and then other people reporting to their section heads, which then report to that one leader. In other kind of in the Indigenous community, there might be 8 hereditary chiefs, and they have more of a collective sharing of power, and it's a very different structure. It's actually quite different than an incident command, and so sometimes there can be a clash of government systems there. So I think that there may be other ways that we can manage fire, especially prescribed fire or letting nations just do cultural burns and understanding that, sometimes that, yeah, a fire might get away, or there might be mistakes or overachievements, but that we're all learning how to do this together. And burning now is also very different than burning in the past. We're dealing with lots of drought. We're dealing with a high buildup of fuels. We're dealing with like multiple disturbance agents like bark beetles and western hemlock looper. There's all sorts of disturbances, and they're all coming together in this cumulative issue. So it can be challenging to put fire in the ground now. And also, we have more extreme fire weather situations. So we have greater winds, we have higher temperatures, and it's just not maybe as simple as it used to be burning. And there's also many values that are out there, especially in British Columbia. Protection of timber values is really huge, and that didn't used to be, 100 years ago, as much of an issue because it wasn't the only value that was managed on the land. And now we're really managing for a specific value. And again, that goes into sometimes the contestant of rights and title and what it means to truly care for the land.
And so when you talked about, I guess, what we would call a burn window, right?
Yeah.
When is it safe to introduce prescribed fire? And it sounds like with a hotter, drier, and windier climate, those windows are smaller.
Yeah, and I mean sometimes they're longer too, but you don't get kind of the specific window in there that you're looking for. You might have a burn window that begins in March, but your ground's still frozen and your fuels are incredibly dry. And so that's not going to get you the desired fire effects that you're hoping for. So it's kind of complicated. I think that the nuances and trying to get those fire objectives right can be really tricky. I mean, my role is writing prescriptions and burn plans and trying to really make sure we're getting the right fire at the right time and the right place. And I find that it's can be very hard because we don't have very accurate weather predictions. We don't have a lot of weather stations available. A lot of places we don't have cell service.
Mhm.
So we're relying on expensive satellite communications. And so being in the place and really, really paying attention to the fuels, to the weather is really, really key where I live and work.
Does it sound like the unsiloing of prescribed fire practice as a knowledge base would be a place where AI could be useful?
I I'm a big believer in people
I am
and
too.
just like I do think tech's really important in the fire world for sure. But I don't think that we can replace people's experience and time on the land.
Yeah.
If you walk out and you can just immediately feel fuels, hear fuels, then you really have a good connection to fire. I just wouldn't really trust AI to give me the metrics that I need in order to make good decisions about fire that day.
Okay. So, how many fire ecologists are there in your best guess?
Like in British
Yeah.
Columbia,
No, on our planet.
on our planet. Wow. Well, we have many fire ecologists that aren't formally trained as fire
Right,
ecologists. Want to
right.
put that out there. Um,
Who may know more, right? Like
who
through
may
their practical
know many
experience. Yeah,
things. Yeah.
right.
Gosh, I just wouldn't even know how to start answering that question because fire ecologists come in so many different forms and with so many different backgrounds. And you could have an amazing fire ecologist who has been working as a wildfire fighter for the last 20 years, for sure. Now, are they trained in, have they gone and got a PhD in fire ecology? No.
Right.
Is their experience just as important? Yes.
More so.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't really know the answer to that.
Yeah. I just wondered, in terms of a networking of information, international fire ecology conferences, etc., opportunities for cross pollination of that wisdom. It
Yeah.
seems like in Australia they're really making a lot of progress in making indigenous practices and knowledge more common stream.
Yeah, they're doing a really great job there. And they're doing really cool things like burning in the middle of the city of Sydney in parks there. So they're really showing people that fire can be safely applied and it's not something to be afraid of. So there's amazing things coming out of Australia, Portugal, the US, Brazil. There's a lot of big movements with fire right now. We have some big international organizations. There's the International Association um, for Wildfire. There's the Association for Fire Ecology. So we do have places where people can come together and share knowledge and translate knowledge, and that's really, really important. Um, what I'd like to see is less people in that academic world,
Yeah.
more people with that um, kind of salt of the earth approach or connection to land approach. People who are, when I was a firefighter, the first people I would ask about weather and environment would be hunters, fisher folk, guide outfitters. Like they are the people that really understand weather and they really understand environmental change. And so you get deployed to a fire, those are the people you want to talk to right away. You really want to get that connection in the community really quickly.
That seems pretty much the opposite of the direction you see things going in now, where people will try to pull up their latest app or predictive software or satellite data, uh, which is merely data and not wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, you could use both, but I wouldn't.
But if your life depended on it, right?
Yeah, like I'd want to just talk to people who really had experienced like what way is the prevailing winds going to come today? I know that they generally come from this direction most of the time. Is that going to be true today? We're under very extreme fire weather. What do you expect to happen? So I would say that, yeah, people who have lived in a place their whole life and have paid attention are the people you want to be talking to.
Okay. So how do we bring those people and their wisdom more to the mainstream, to the forefront?
Well, I would like to see more people go to those people. I'm a
Okay.
really big believer in place-based research. And so, in Canada, most of the people live within 5 kilometers of the US border. That's kind of where our main population centers are. It's
My
where our most,
condolences.
it's where most of our universities are. But then all the forests are located north of there. And so we have all these forested and grassland ecosystems, and we just need to not kind of parachute into them and do research into them. We need to live and connect with those very distinct ecosystems. In British Columbia, we have so many different fire environments, and it's not enough to kind of pop out for a summer and do research, I think. I think we really need to just start scratching the surface on some of these ecosystems where we have some of the biggest fire events, the most impactful fire events. Because when fires start, let's say in the boreal, well, they don't just stay in the boreal. They spread smoke to Europe, to New York City. And so the impacts of these wildfires can be really significant globally. And yet we don't always treat them that way.
Yeah.
So I would like to see more people valuing research in the context of regions and places so we can truly understand a little bit more about fire behavior, fire predictions, and then historical fire as well.
It sounds like you're recommending an approach more like a Jane Goodall approach. You know, like go live there, meet the population that you're studying, and stay with them.
Yeah, well, she is obviously was an incredible lady.
She
Um,
was.
yeah, so I've actually thought a lot about her research approaches, and yeah, pretty important. She was able to teach the world a lot about humility and connection.
What are your takeaways from Jane Goodall? If you've been studying her life and her work for some time, and now you're making corollaries to uh, how does her study of primates inform our study and dissemination of knowledge about fire? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I probably have two main thoughts. One is patience. It takes a long, long time, like a lifetime, to start truly understanding a system. And then secondly is that human connection is everywhere. And it's with animals, it's with plants, and it's definitely with fire. And so we all kind of have that within us. And sometimes I think we just need to slow down. We're at such a fast pace right now. I think we just need to slow down and feel that connection with our surroundings. I think it really helps humans. I don't know, for me, it gives me kind of a sense of peace. And I think that from what I've seen in Jane Goodall's work, it gave her that as well.
That's very interesting. And I guess it's a very uh, different temporal sense between fire ecologist and emergency manager, right? Because as a fire ecologist, you can take the long view and recognize the value of a lifetime of study of something. And as an emergency manager, you have, 20 minutes to come up with a plan to thwart disaster for an entire community. And you're not in a position where you have the luxury of time. You're not going to study the fire as it begins to erupt near the Palisades, you know, within a day or two, right? You've lost your city.
Yeah, and we really, really need good emergency managers. Like wildfire is still a disaster. And I'm not saying that it's not at all. Like we still have incredibly significant wildfire disasters and they're playing out year after year. And first responders are so, so important. And one thing I'm concerned about is just having so much fatigue in people and mental health issues. And, sometimes here we have people coming out to be with us on a prescribed burn or cultural fire, and they're still exhausted from last year.
Mm-hmm.
So many of our young firefighters have had more experience fighting fires in the last 5 years than people who'd fought fire for 20 years. So it's really important to think about. And yeah, I think that that experience is really important, but we also need to make sure that we have extra care for our first responders and appreciation for them because it's just a really, really hard job.
Incredibly so.
Hmm.
It seems like stress in that situation really comes from being married to an outcome rather than to a
Yeah.
process, right? If you go out there with the mind, I'm going to fight the fire as best I can, and ultimately it's not up to me what happens. Uh, then you can always go home feeling like you did your best. But if you tie your sense of success to whether or not you prevented a given city or a given area from burning, then you kind of set yourself up for a lot higher anxiety.
Yeah, and I think we need to think about success quite differently.
Yeah.
Um, to me, when I think about success in the Palisades or the Eaton Fire or the Jasper Fire, I think how incredible that they got that many people out. The success is in saving lives because a lot of those fires come down to it. They're not fighting infrastructure fires, really. It's about saving human lives. And so a lot of firefighters have been trained to fight infrastructure fires, houses, power plants, like sewage treatment facilities, all those different things. But then they're being tasked with, no, we need to get as many people out as possible. It's a different objective
Very.
and a very, very important one. And so in many instances, we're not fighting fires, we're saving lives. And yeah, it's a very different perspective to put on firefighting.
Such an important distinction, and one
Mhm.
that's widely ignored in the media. Right? Open any article about Eaton or Palisades, and it doesn't say. The headline is not how many people were evacuated, right? The headline is how many people died.
Yeah, or how they could have done better firefighting tactics. And I think that's really hard because I think the media needs to be also trained on um, what is possible with fighting fire because they're like, why didn't they put more water on it? And you often hear these things, if they could only have like fought the fire head on. But a lot of our fires are unsuppressible right now. We can't fight fire in 100-mile-an-hour winds. We can't directly attack a fire that's moving downhill, like and moving through significantly harmful combustibles. Um, there
Yeah,
is limits to our ability to fight fires, and there's limits to our abilities to even kind of breathe in some of these significant gases and lead paints
right.
and you think
Television
about
sets and plastic sofas and all of it.
electric
Yeah,
car batteries, like all
yeah.
these different things. They're very significant cancer causing agents. Yeah, it's just something to think about, and often that's not kind of portrayed heavily in the media. So the risks to actually firefighting.
So if there's a more of a shift towards evacuation over suppression, then that creates a safer environment for firefighters.
Yeah, and
Although
also just kind of
they're not much trained in that, right? They spend a lot of time on hose attack and technical aspects of fire suppression, but not so much on orderly evacuation.
yeah, I think like importantly too, like when we are doing things like wildfire risk reduction activities, so like we go in and we prepare communities for a fire. But I think what the community thinks is that will stop the fire.
Hmm.
But it's never designed to stop a fire. It's designed to slow down a fire. It's designed to aid in fire suppression, so to get people in access to fighting a fire. But it's never designed to stop a fire. So that kind of knowledge exchange to communities is so important. Like this actually will just give you more time to evacuate. It might not necessarily save your home, but allows you to get out. And so, really trying to kind of communicate that, like with regard to all these things we're doing, all this mitigation we're doing, again, it's about saving lives. Sure, it might protect a community by giving people enough time to suppress a fire, but ultimately, the goal might be quite different than what the community thinks.
So would you say that the goal of many fire activities is simply to create more time for an evacuation?
Yeah, more time for response and more time for evacuation. That's what I think about when I think about field breaks, when I think about wildfire risk reduction activities around communities within the wildland urban interface.
Very interesting. And I don't think that that's, widely thought of that way.
Yeah, I think that the more time we discuss fire, especially in the winter months or like when there's not direct and significant wildfire seasons or fires within cities, it usually sparks a conversation about fire and then it kind of teeters off. If we have it as more just part of our conversation and more thinking about fire in both the beneficial side of it, but then also like how are we going to prepare for the disastrous side of it? It's really important. I mean, like here in my house, we light a fire every day with my children, and it's how we heat our home, and we burn right around our property. They're kind of learning really similarly, like I did as a child, that fire is actually a really helpful tool. Um, and it's not done with precision. Often it's done, with careful intention, but it can be this really helpful tool. And so they're going to have a very different relationship with someone that's only ever seen or experienced the wildfire disasters. And so I think it's really important that we bring in that education component, making sure that schools are teaching kids, okay, well, you live in a fire dependent ecosystem. What do you think that means? It's gonna need fire at some point, and it's gonna get either the right kind of fire at the right time, or it's going to have a really big buildup of fuels, and then it's gonna have the wrong kind of fire, probably at the wrong time. And really having that conversation with kids, I think, can really be helpful. And then they start to kind of shift how they think about fire, how they connect with fire. Really, it's this philosophical conversation that you're introducing pretty early on. But it can change kids' perspectives. I mean, when you think about, like, most people don't sit around a campfire alone. Like, it is a very, like, community social based activity, and the feeling that you generally feel is pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, it's a comforting thing. And I think that if we kind of connect to that more evolutionary side of fire, it'll be really helpful for moving forward.
It's very interesting that you made the distinction between what you called a fire-dependent community and what many people would call a fire-prone community, where they're
Mm.
simply focused on the danger posed by fire.
Yeah, I mean, most of the danger posed by fire is because we've decided to settle in places that are fire dependent. And the topography would suggest that there is more significant fire there. Just because, like, we all like living at the top of hills, or like right next to a canyon, or these big viewscapes. Well, your south facing aspect is probably burned a lot in the past, whether by humans or by lightning. And so kind of being a little bit more aware of our surroundings, and also what we choose to bring in close to our homes is so important. Sometimes we are just bringing in the most flammable vegetation out there and putting it right next to our doors. Even our doormats are incredibly flammable. And we don't often think about that, but it can make the difference in whether you lose the home that day or not.
I guess people don't think of the doormat as something in their zone zero space, right?
No.
They're busy removing vegetation and meanwhile putting in petrochemical
Yeah.
plastic mats in front of the door.
Or straw or coconut. Like, there's all sorts of things that are kind of these hidden flammabilities, uh, that we don't really think of, or something that's not flammable in one place, but we bring it in and it becomes quite flammable in another place because you've kind of changed the environment there.
Give me an example of that.
Well, like let's say cactuses and palm fronds, well, they're not really that flammable in some tropical locations
Right.
because there's just not the heat and the dryness to kind of like put it into this significant flammability. Sure, if you were to burn the single plant, but if you suddenly then bring a whole bunch of those plants and you do them in a landscaping environment and you bring them into a very dry and very hot environment, well, suddenly you're really increasing the flammability. So it's
Interesting.
just, yeah, just something to think about. And invasives are another big thing. Like, when I always think about Scotch broom, which is, prolific in Scotland, not very flammable, probably, like in Scotland. It's a pretty foggy environment, it's not that dry. Well, you bring it to a place like Vancouver Island in Canada, and suddenly you're dealing with quite a dry environment. It's quite windy, and now you've really increased the flammability of that landscape.
Interesting. And so when we name a certain type of plants as invasive species, we're automatically othering them,
Mm.
right? Um, you know, I think versus recognizing that they're opportunistic species, right? That if If conditions are favorable in a particular area, then that species will inhabit it. But
Hmm.
not so much that they've come to invade,
Yeah, I know alien species is another one that we tend to do.
right?
There's and like keep in mind, of course, there's always been a trade of species. That's always
That's
been
right.
something that humans have done and continue to do is trade species. How we got a lot of our species here in northern British Columbia through active trading. That's how we got hazelnut bushes. So a lot of the things that we think about as kind of native to here, yes, but they came from somewhere else. And then there's a lot of like, for me, I'm like, oh, well, I love blackberries.
Right.
No, they're not from here. So
Right.
like I think differently about them than I do other things like weeds in my garden I can't get rid of.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when
Yeah.
we bring
Hmm.
bananas and berries and
Yeah.
whatnot from South America and we
Hmm.
eat them, the seeds end up, in our backyards, and we've given given them an opportunity to grow in a new place. And then
Yep.
whether it's conducive or not, it'll be based on the constraints of that species.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, the more fire that we have at a large scale, the more species that are going to kind of adapt to that fire environment and be part of it are going to be that future fire state. And so more fire equals more plants that are hopefully adapted to fire. But sometimes the plants can't keep up to the severe wildfire seasons. And so you kind of at some point can reach a tipping point where you move from conifers or more herbaceous plants to more grassland dominated savannas. And so we're starting to see that when we have lots of repeat fires in close succession that are high severity. And then you see that, well, there's really just not a seed bank, there's not soils to support trees anymore. And now we switch into more of a grassland dominated environment. Was that what it was in the past? I don't know. Probably, like at some point. So it's really difficult to kind of be like, well, we need to restore it back to trees. But then it's like, well, restore it back to what state and when?
right.
Yeah.
Right. Make America flammable again. Right.
Raking is not always
Yeah, that's right. Right.
effective here.
No, no.
Mhm.
So I have a kind of a fire botany question, and since I have heard of fire ecologists, but not fire botanists, I'm going to hope that all falls under your umbrella. But we talk about different species being adapted to or favoring particular soil types, soil concentrations, and the different chemistries of the soil will either make a hospitable or inhospitable environment for any given plants. What happens when we drop millions and millions of pounds of fire retardant on areas which can't help but change the soil chemistry? When we drop phosphorus and iron oxides and borates and ammonia derivatives on these areas to treat fires, are we creating an environment in which those currently native species no longer can thrive?
Yeah, it's a good question. One that I don't really know the answer to because, like, some of those things are naturally found in soils and they're like fertilizers, right? So they can be a nutrient pulse for sure. They're very soapy, and so often they come off the land relatively quickly and go into water systems. Now, I don't know how they interact with water very well. Um, it's, I think, a great area of study for sure, to better understand how fire retardants interact. Like, it's interesting, like, we just don't see them used at the same scale in Canada as the United States. Often in the United States, oh, like so many fires are interface fires where there's heavy use of retardants and very direct suppression because there's almost always a community located near that fire. In Canada, we can't often use retardant in the same way because of the scale of fires.
Okay.
And yeah, there, we also have to make sure that like resources are used appropriately for protecting communities if that is happening at the same time. So I guess the answer is I don't really know about the long-term impacts of retardants, but yeah, like one thing that we do know is the long-term impacts of like ash and nutrients from wildfire can be really important to soils. So that's a really important thing, people have known that for thousands of years because they've used it. Like slash and burn or swidden agriculture is a great example. It's a great use of a pulse of fertilizer. And like for me, like burning our fields as a child, a pulse of fertilizer, and then you get that rich, rich grass growing up after. Very big, like grazeland management tool. So within that, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, lots of important macronutrients. So yeah, I think soils in particular, not very well studied. We love to study what we can see,
Right.
and we don't often study what's below ground. You think
Yeah.
about mycorrhizal, microbial connections within soil and how they're impacted by fire. Yeah, I mean, I would love to know. A very, very interesting area of study.
Yeah. I think that area actually has a lot of potential for fire management. That we complain about the amount of understory or dead wood on the ground as a way to that fire spread. And I wonder, could you just spray a slurry of spores on there that would increase the conversion of dead wood to soil, which should reduce flammability without a lot of manpower.
There's all sorts of like different ideas out there, and there's like burying wood is another one
Right.
to store carbon.
Yep.
I think
That
the
sounds very
important
labor
thing,
intensive though.
yeah, I think importantly is that it's not like when a wildfire goes through, like all the carbon's gone.
Right.
Um, Much of the carbon is retained in dead burnt wood for a really, really long time. And so the slow breakdown is actually important. It's important for soils. Like a quick breakdown might actually change the components of the soil. So soils are old and they're slow. And if we try and kind of speed things up, I don't know what would happen, but we tend to like to speed things up.
Right. Well, because there's
Yeah.
a feeling that that we don't have enough time.
Yeah. We tend to also like to put ourselves first.
That's right. Right. I often laugh when I see, save the planet, save the earth. Like the earth's been here long before us. It'll be here long after us. But I think what they really mean is, save us.
Save the environment so that we can thrive in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very Homo sapien centric.
Yeah, or even like capitalism centric, probably.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
No, it's very interesting when you look at the solutions proposed for various aspects of fire problems. There seems to be an enormous disparity between what makes sense on the ground and what makes sense in a pitch deck.
And also, we're not very good at failing. We're not very good at like going out there and be like, that didn't work, and then sharing why it didn't work. We often like to hide failures. It's like, oh, that didn't work. Let's sweep it under the rug. And then someone else goes and makes the same mistake and then it's
Right.
swept under the rug. So I think that having a society that's more comfortable talking about failures and sharing why experiments didn't go quite as they planned, or why there was an overachievement, why they didn't get quite the fire behavior that day, instead of having it in an internal report. I think it is really important for us to kind of understand, okay, well, what was the decision made? Why was it made? Could a different decision been made, or was it completely out of our control? I really like to have that information so that I can learn from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty important.
Yeah. Some industries have been
Mhm.
good with that. Medicine, you'll
Mhm.
seldom see somebody reinvent a vaccine that's already been shown not to work because the medical community as a science community shares that information. And they did a great job with that in the airline industry of I don't know, decriminalizing, but de-defaming, pilot error, right?
Hmm.
That when pilots make a mistake, they're encouraged to share exactly what the circumstances were. And if it was human error, to reveal or help discover things that could help prevent that in the first place, rather than demonizing the person who made the mistake. They just say, okay, this is what happened, and here's how we might be able to prevent that from happening in the future.
Yeah, I think that we could use a little bit more of that in prescribed fire. Like if a prescribed fire goes wrong, often all prescribed fires are just shut down right
Right,
away.
right.
Instead of being like, okay, well, everyone who's doing active burn right now, let's all get together and just learn from those mistakes or from those learnings and then apply it immediately to what we're doing right now.
Yeah, you actually learn very little when things go right.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things, and that's why we do really good after action reviews. It's like, okay, well, here's where I made that misstep. Here's how I'm going to correct it. So I think that we're getting there. It's just there's a lot of like reputation and professionalism and ego on the line that we've kind of valued, and we don't really value that like okay, I'm going to take a step back. And again, it's that patience and the like more humbleness side of fire that's really important.
Right. If I
Hmm.
share my
Hmm.
experience, no matter how it went, I could prevent someone else from recreating the same mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. You're fascinating chatting with you. You're in such an interesting space, and there's so much more to it than physical science.
Yeah, I actually don't think that I do much physical science anymore. Like, mostly I just think about fire and I want to learn from others how they feel about fire or how they connect with fire or how they understand it. And so it's really, for me, like I started as a biophysical scientist and I've quickly really seen the value of social science in understanding fire, that social dimensions has been so missing in kind of how we've really understood fire.
Very interesting. This really emphasizes the importance of the word cultural and cultural burning. And I think we need to recognize that cultural burning does not necessarily imply um, indigenous burning, but our current cultures have many undisclosed or unacknowledged feelings about fire themselves.
I mean, cultural burning is going to mean very specific things to each nation. But yeah, again, recognizing that there is other cultures that use fire and would like to use fire again. But importantly, in North America, really valuing and understanding that cultural burning or indigenous-led fire stewardship here goes back millennia, in some cases 14,000 years. And that knowledge is so, so important. And if it's not shared, then that's okay. Um, because hopefully the idea is that that leadership will continue and we'll be able to learn along the way about some of these amazing practices.
I hope so. So thanks so much for joining me. Absolutely fascinating. We've been chatting with Kira Hoffman, way up in northern BC. Even though it might be the center of the province, it's still way, way up there. Thanks so much for your time and for your insights today, Kira.
Thanks for having me.
You have been listening to the wisdom from north of the border of Kira Hoffman. I'm Steve Wolf. You're here on the fire break. I hope you picked up something really interesting today. I sure did. Thanks so much, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care.